Symbolic History Through Sight and Sound, 39, now Omega. By a leap of impossibility, the now Alpha and now Omega have to draw together. The task of the Alpha was to render what is mine to Earth and Cosmos. The Omega must treat Earth and Cosmos as my own. The mode of this convergence can only be the continual embrace and transcendence of antinomy. It is creative paradox which besouls the worlds. What is the paradox of walking? To fall and not to fall. To turn incipient falling to a directed, ongoing progress. Here, Andres Eigler, 11 months old, explores that simple skill which the tottering earth has desperately to learn. We come to life adapted to wonders of earth and sky, as beyond known chance or causal prediction, as the myths of East or West, say Genesis, assume. All the inwrought balances Newton's science had to ascribe to the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. Above us circle two spheres, so disposed as to seem of equal, hence eclipsing size. The coronal passion of the sun, lord of day, the sterile death of the moon, goddess of night, and archetypal antinomy. And in music, the two-voiced stretch of Gothic Leonin. Swells to the recitative and ground bass of Baroque Miniscalchi. Though in the opposition of the sky, romance has leaned from the busy action of male day to the moony Beulah of embracing shade, Milton. Sweet the coming on of grateful evening mild, then silent night, with this her solemn bird, and this fair moon, and these the gems of heaven, her starry train. How often in later music, from Bach to this Mahler, the tangled fabric cleaves. To a dialogue of high and low. So on the round earth, tensile limits reappear, sea and land, mountains and plain, desert and fertile ground, farm and forest. From the dawn of life, entropic up and down, reflects itself in leaf and flame, plant and animal, grazers and hunters, this panorama of the American Pliocene. Douanier Rousseau, charmed by tropical shows in the Paris Exposition of 1889, caught nature's ambivalence in this painting called Surprised, lightning from rain, wind-tossed trees, the tiger pushing through reeds. No doubt the enlightened taming of the British landscape and family scene, this David Allen of 1781, appeared to have put to rest the old behemoth Leviathan raging and uprooting through time and space. Fate, soothed as it were by Orphic airs and country dance, Grétry's pre-revolutionary fluff. Even Wordsworth would dream that nature never did betray the heart that loved her. though the Bible and Shakespeare were still read, and Blake had already summoned this Michelangeleic Joseph of Arimathea to Albion's rocky coast. By 1793, about when Beethoven went to receive the spirit of Mozart from the hands of Haydn, Blake would be limning and voicing the radical ambivalence of these angels contending for the human child, as in the marriage of heaven and hell, the passive obedience called good, the shackled desire called evil by the world, but by Blake, energy, the only life. So, upon this threshing floor, Odyssean earthlings push off from island domesticities into storm ocean and star void. Appropriately, with the globe already, as in this painted composite of satellite night views, fired so wastefully, the spread of cities, slash and burn of tropic jungles, flaming grasslands of the sub-Sahara, burn-off of natural gas around the Persian Gulf and in Siberia, flood-lighted squid fishing off Japan. What can the now be but the rooted outreaching of the whole tree of consciousness, as patiently enduring as Holbein's waiting family, Earth's sentient ingathering, where the coded past, in each as in all, presses the probabilities of a present to shape some future, hung between leaf and flame. That now is a transformational one many, far from the dimensionless instant ticked between lost past and unformed future, which the science of chronology seems to make of it. Examine a timepiece closely, this one, say, of 1558. What are its elements? First, some vibrating recurrence, without flywheel, pendulum, pulsing crystal. No clock could keep time, any more than Earth, without rotation and revolution, could measure days and years. But that oscillation returns where it was, a dead beat, always the same. So every clock requires another element, a numbered advance by which the future succeeds the past. Has the union of these two, wheel and arrow, compassed time? No. The spiral that knits these poles requires a body of perception. Like a recording clock, the mollusk of a sundial shell graphs its growth in this demarcated coil. The shell alone is a spiral resolution of the arrow and the wheel, but it contained a now, perceptive wholeness of a living process. Without that threshold of organic action, this architectonica could not have shared in time, creeping, feeding on his stomach foot, a gastropod. Are the heavens comprehended in Bourge's 1594 clock of planets and the starry sphere? What of the eternally rooted now of inwardness, as cosmically free and bound as I am that I am? Had not Heraclitus, for all his burning antinomies, we are and we are not, made this clear? Not on my authority, but on that of truth, logos. Accept the fact that all things are one. And Leibniz, the machines of nature are still machines in their smallest parts, ad infinitum. Here a midge struggles from lava and water to wings and air. Dante's sky search that racks the globe, worms born to form the angelic butterfly. The cosmos, like a protoplasmic bubble, this photocomposite of 1,000,000 mapped galaxies from an estimated 100 billion, each averaging 10 billion suns, evolving at all levels, energy, particles, atoms, chemicals, through dust clouds, galaxies, suns forming and exploding, dark stars, planets, satellites, from the assumed bang to the earth now of man. This cosmos has kept all processes going in creative interplay, eons before we brought our observations to the scene. Surely, without cosmic consciousness, some print of mind on the radiant void, there could be no cosmos. The problem is to put ourselves in touch with it, for we are earthlings still, earth-ravishers, and each pretends, like this Albright, to be himself alone, a slime-mold eddy on the chute of entropy. That gravitational axiom, in a universe lively for 15 billion years, that whatever happens is sure to have had a gradient for happening, where a gradient, by definition, goes downhill. But what of the salmon's gradient to leap up waterfalls? Does quantum uncertainty herald a nature where, as de Nerval wrote, life breaks forth in everything? In any case, in cosmic extension, the axiom of closed system decay rounds on itself, nature not admitting of one-way formulations. Proliferate has as strong an imperative as subside to rest. Like the stars sowed by this rosette nebula, stars, any one of which might in its origin be wrapped in such a halo of dust and gas as this recently studied Beta Pictoris first photographed evidence of a solar system apparently in process of formation. Like those stars, every weed seeds itself as if to take over the earth, but as entropic down swerves to up, so proliferation can turn exuberance to a throttling, spirit at war with itself. I lay in the gourd bed, flowered, fruitful, slipping curved fingers down the tendrils to feel the clutch of subtle runners, twisting a noose for the throats of grasses.
Ease, don't hold it, baby, when I cry. Give me every bit of it, else I'll die. I'm wild about that thing.
Once the thrust of human sexuality mounted the oldest fertility urge, what was to limit orgiastic celebration? The Greeks could practice our illegal obscenities in sacred precincts with temple courtesans consecrated to Aphrodite and Dionysus, as in Pindar's Ascolion.
Yes, give my bell a ring. You can press my button. I'm wild about
In India, such rituals appear in stone on the heaven bands of Hindu temples, here at Khajuraho, 1000 AD, while the West cowered under the penitential climax of the Dark Ages.
Yeah, I like your ting-a-ling. Kiss me like you mean it. I'm wild about that thing.
Small wonder the procreative drive, here symbolized in an Indian miniature of the 18th century, where the Nayika is the coupling mate of all creatures, those beasts who in the upper section work God's command, be fruitful and multiply. No wonder that rapture is so hard to damp today, even where it overpopulates the earth.
About it when you hold me tight. Let me linger in your arms all night. I'm wild about that thing.
In truth, that older world had harsh ways of stemming the overflow. Those very temples of erotic abandon equally enshrine the skeletal attendants of Kali, drinking blood on the battlefield. The same Shiva who wreathes in bliss with Sakti and Parvati withers to the death lord of yoga, doing penance. How soon is the world to become as ruthless in paradox as the old sacrificial gods? Must we steel our hard-won humanity against ideal and sentimental pretenses? A simple fact, there was never a more ideal or sentimental folly than that by which modern hygiene and medicine were spread abroad without any thought or concern, much less program, how one planet might house and feed the resulting population. Though war and politics have used famine in Biafra and Ethiopia, drought and crop failure played a typically third world role. So also with the 10,000 Sudanese children, refugees from civil strife and want, who in 1988 slept and begged on the streets of the capital city, Khartoum.
All about it when you hold me tight. Let me linger
Yet
in your
still, like
arms
these
all
mating
night.
frogs, female clutched by two males to fertilize the extruded eggs, black tribesmen and white Christians join in protesting birth control. The indulgence of freedom builds a countertension to the common good, radically in Giotto's detail of injustice. By the compromise of law, each must forego his savage claim to kill, rape, and rob. Such the minimal contract Hobbes and Locke would think adequate. But can we stop there? Even Adam Smith gives society the duty of protecting every member from the injustice or oppression of every other. What then of economic oppression? What if industry work injury? What if our Keynesian boom produced opulent disecology? Must not Smith's natural liberty explore some maximal contract for the life good of the whole? Despite which the First World War, the Nazi War, and even the half-century of Cold War, here Russian tanks on the streets of Prague, have been lived and presented as the struggle of freedom against tyranny. Our model for that was Greek. In Herodotus' history, how the invading Persian hordes, lashed to the pass of Thermopylae by captains of squadrons, rued the courage of Leonidas and his Spartans. Those men of whom Demaratus had warned Xerxes, they are free, yet not wholly free, for law is their master. What their law bids them, that they do. A strength subtly expressed in Simonides' inscription. Stranger, tell the Spartans we lie here, obedient to their bidding, where obedient is the middle passive participle of persuade, implying we lie here, to their bidding self-persuaded. For an art contrast, the 500 BC archers of Darius I confront the 443 BC freedom of the Parthenon frieze. Yet the Greeks, in their very prime of civic life and art, saw such exercise of human daring as a field of mythic overweening and tragic fall, to which their land attests, Holderline. But where are the thrones and temples? Where are the vessels brimmed once with nectar, delight of the gods, with song? The great Zeus temple of Olympia, reduced by earthquake to these shattered ruins, of which the remnant carvings, most dramatic sequence of Greek art, exhibit, though from different myths, the phases of Aeschylean tragedy. In this Meton, from the labors of Hercules, the hero brings the man-eating Stymphalian birds to his barefoot patroness Athena. It is God-given power in superhuman act. In the West pediment, the battle of Lapiths and Centaurs becomes such a net of death as is spread in the Agamemnon and Coephary. Who shall tear the curse from their blood? The end shall be destiny. For the third phase, we draw from the East pediment the mystery of the rapt diviner, seeing as through loss and turmoil some healing transcendence. Let that cathartic triad of power, overreach, and prophecy resonate as the noose tightens on the world. Surely it resonated for Greco-Rome. The first chorus of the Antigone is a praise of man, many a wonder. But the Greek word for wonder is daina, as in dinosaur, a greatness also to be feared. So in the Riachi warriors, Greek energy risks the hubris of the Peloponnesian War. It is Plato's fair and spangled state, ready to burst with liberty. In our pursuit of happiness, we forget how far the revolt of agriculture seemed a profane plowing up and seeding of our mother, goddess Earth. By Nero's Rome, the outrage is too blatant, too devastating. The preface of Livy's history, about 10 A.D., foreshadows not only the crisis then festering at the heart of empire, but every such degradation, to quote Thucydides, as long as the nature of man remains the same. This Livy translation is from a Phi Beta Kappa address by Gordon Craig. Poverty with us went hand in hand with contentment. Of late years, wealth has made us greedy, and self-indulgence has brought us, through every form of sensual excess, to be, if I may so put it, in love with death, both individual and collective. Already the followers of Christus were being burnt for nocturnal lights, so Tacitus in Nero's gardens. Strange the claimants of an embodied Saviour should have withdrawn to catacomb entombments of flesh and outwardness. But it was flesh God had taken, and as we have centrally pursued, that judgment ultimatum to declining Rome would incarnate in the West a body of assertive temporality, reaching from the humbled earth denial of this 5th century mosaic of St. Ambrose and St. Maternus in Milan. Through a Christian antithesis of Baroque exuberance, assertive, whether for joy or grief. Here, about 1670, with Bernini and Lully. An assurance always primed for the heroic miscarriages of church and state, Bernini's Constantine and his Louis XIV. Through that, to the secular explosion of the French Revolution, this 1792 rallying of volunteers, carved 40 years later, when surely it smacked of some Faustian compact, even in Rude's Arc de Triomphe commemoration, where the face of war above follows Michelangelo's sketch of a fury. So why not pair it with the close of Berlioz's Fantastique March and Double Fugue? Taking this sequence as a springboard from the disclaimer of earth with hope in God, through a Godhead seated in the physical, its space, time, and cause, shrunk then to a deist ground of mere nature for the hue and cry of liberty, equality, and brotherhood, hurled as we are on that springboard toward an alarming future, we know that the tragic vaunt of freedom is not Greek or past, but with us, an archetypal antinomy in the now. Since between the call to arms and Rude's reenactment had come the Rhine invasion, upon which we have quoted elsewhere from Goethe's Hermann und Dorothea. May I never again in such contemptuous madness look upon man. Better the beast in his rage. Never let him speak of freedom as if he could rule his own passions. And after 20 years of outrage, the Peninsular Campaign, with the long agony of guerrilla warfare, to be recorded by Goya in searing prints and canvases. So what was Blake's prophecy when, in 1795, a year after the watercolor we saw earlier, he magnified and reversed its scene of good and evil angels struggling for a child to produce this monoprint, where the energy figure has hardened as from Lucifer to Satan, the French Revolution meanwhile exhibiting at home and abroad the fierce scaling over of what Blake would call the Orc cycle, where rebellion struck the tyrant dead, became a tyrant in his stead. America seemed to avoid such a reversal. Our revolution hardly stirred the social fabric. It was the educated men of property and substance who took over here, and what they made constitutional was the liberal heritage of British law and institutions, local government, schools and churches. The have-nots could pioneer. The haves reasonably accepted that the unalienable rights of the Declaration would in time be spread around, as a century later, in the prosperous Midwest, at this neighborly construction of a barn. Though Paine, our only radical, was exhorting, we must think as if we were the first men that thought, while the unflawed spirit of Jefferson seemed to share that boldness. At Monticello, 3 practical stories contrived and disguised under the mask of one. Yet in architecture, as in politics, the genius of the new republic was the caution of its originality, its power of invention within the traditions of the past, here of Palladio. Compare the house Schinkel built in Sanssouci Park about 1826 for the Prussian Princess Charlotte, by marriage Queen of Russia. Its academic neo-Greek wants the freshness of Monticello, but the clean modesty might almost have raised Jeffersonian hopes for Hegel's Germany, though in fact the whole country would veer in a century to the frenzied excesses of a madman's tyranny. Another Schinkel design may give a clue to the fatal entanglement of that Europe. Here, a fairy tale vision he would sketch for the same Charlotte and her husband Nicholas I, that Iron Tsar, a monstrous, somehow Greco-Moorish palace never built, by the Black Sea on the Crimea. It is the sort of exhibition Hearst would first spring on America, at some cost to Jeffersonian democracy. Would R.C. Woodville's 1851 irony of the man shrouded behind dark glasses searching the news in the Spy while he waits with others for a stagecoach have let it out that the father's trust in a free press to bring truth to a free people might, as the blind lead the blind in Bruegel, end in the ditch of slogan sale and media debauchery, as when the children turn on the telly and soul cries out, "Who let the enemy in the house?" Surely a prophet could have seen that when neglect of Rousseau's dictum, because the force of circumstance tends always to destroy equality, the force of legislation must tend to maintain it, had installed plutocracy, even our balanced freedoms would join the death dance of the planet, that great kermesse of arrogation strung from the maypole of the twin towers of world trade, out through all competing nations and bank colonies, to the last burning of jungles for the brief agricultural failure the tropics allow. As Prometheus says in Aeschylus, "Besides this, I gave them fire." So freedom chases the old beast around the tree until the pursuer becomes the pursued, hounded to death in the hunt for happiness. Thus our lot, too, may harden to a planned order of the whole. Our freedom death, our life road regimen. Around the 1800 switch from loose rein to curb rein, when a liberation still functional in America veered in revolutionary France toward the control of Europe, in that explosion of hope, how deeply David's unfinished 1797 Napoleon is cloven. So in Rousseau's Social Contract, does the general will ask Jefferson's state of minimal interference, or the maximal state Marx would infer from the same text, Rousseau? The general will is always right and tends to the public advantage, but it does not follow that the deliberations of the people have always the same rectitude. Some must have their wills made conformable to their reason, and others must be taught what it is they will. From thence is born the necessity of a legislator. In that lawgiver, proclaiming like a shaman the general will, sovereign over all, lurked the Revolutionary Republic of Virtue, 1793, when the Council of the Commune would require the destruction of all relics of superstition and feudalism. Here, from Notre Dame, a face of Gothic humanity, buried almost 200 years. Under Hébert, Notre Dame became the temple of reason, where the nude dancer Maillard impersonated truth, until the scandal of her rights gave deist Robespierre cause for guillotining the radical faction, extremists in extremis.
Die Augen schließ ich wieder, noch schlägt das Herz so warm.
Two phrases from Schubert's Winterreise occasion two images from a dream of spring, Frühlingstraum, where the frost on the window suggests leaves and flowers. The incalculable yearning of the tearful Major has summoned Caspar David Friedrich's pen magic of the searching transcendental self. Against which Schubert's mood breaks into proud defiance. If there are no gods on earth, we will be gods ourselves.
Will kein Gott auf Erden sein, sind wir selber Götter.
The urge to that was already in Friedrich's longing, as it had been in Goethe, but Jericho's nude gives it the desperate muscle of Napoleonic France, prophetic rumblings from the tragic continent. While here the confrontation was delayed, not yet the Promethean vaunt or fatal rupture. Yet the very energy and expansive success of America, Chicago, from the fort and trading post of 1831, through the spur and stimulus of the Great Fire of 1871, to the 1892 spread of shipping and trade, industry and housing, that surge of powers would launch us on some such tragic risk as Promethean Greece had signalized. Since our freedom of quest, Adam Smith's quick and happy way to clear a land and build a booming nation rested on what had long sustained the prosperity of Europe, that taming of nature, which ties this Van Vianen 1600 log rafting down some German river to Lucas Susquehanna of 1872, America still counting on what Smith and Marx both assume, their common and fatal error, that nature is inexhaustible and works gratuitously. But we know too well what price nature exacts. We who face the extremes of a changing climate, Gaia's great storms and droughts, summer 1988, these barges stranded on the old Father of Waters near my hometown of Greenville, Mississippi. We who feel the more actinic rays of the sun, who experience polluted streams, trashed beaches, garbage fills, the old timber clear cut from the ranges, and we shall know and feel more as the world pinch for food and water, raw materials and energy advances. Consider the rise and fall of dinosaurs. Such adaptive radiation and Earth seizure must throw life balances, genetic or social, out of whack. Organic causality is a complex interplay. The fall of comets or of asteroids could only have posed a general challenge, which in fact fishes in the sea, even sharks, first birds in the air, reptile sprawlers, lizards, snakes, and crocodiles, besides early mammals, managed to live through, where all ruling reptiles, dinosaurs, large or small, of diverse orders, in ocean, air, and all continents, became extinct. External impingement hardly accounts for so selective a catastrophe, from which man should learn, if learning is possible. Since the human assault on the globe, through mechanized war and peace, capitalist, communist, third world, exhibits some such unorganized chain reaction as must have marked the evolutionary crisis of the higher reptiles, some irreversibility of cultural as of genetic process. Take the burning of coal for an always unchecked upward spiral of population and energy demand. Here the Four Corners plant, San Juan, New Mexico, belching dioxides of carbon and sulfur. The feedbacks are enormously complex, say company scientists, meaning we can't act because we can't be sure, while the production of solar panels is neglected or suppressed. Hardly cost-effective, deceiving and deceived by an economics of the fragmented particular, which obscures the cost of greenhouse gases and acid rain. Fourier at the beginning and Arrhenius at the end of the last century had linked carbon dioxide to climate. I heard of it in 1934 from Barr at Virginia. Meanwhile, industry has plunged dead ahead. No doubt one reads now of sustainable development, and that such polluting power plants as this on the Ganges fail to comply. But how is book knowledge to change the politics of need and greed? Worst of all, when the so-called planned societies, who took up the banner of world hope, plan nothing but police enforcement of their own dogmatic rule, blind to the tensile tie of means and ends, materialist hicks, who, as Simone Weil said, have fallen to the top in the gravity of power. This Romanian town of Copsamica become, under suppression of comment, the most polluted place on earth. And those other hicks on the western side, who call themselves political scientists and economists, and who take pride in having persuaded America that plan is a dirty word, all incapable of polyvalent thinking, as if an essential ingredient, Adam Smith's free enterprise or Marx's labor, were the entire recipe and cause of prosperity or of value. They deplore organic analogies, but the goal-directed symbiosis of the body is not totalitarian. Evolution has endowed its cells with genes of common loyalty and service, for each to pursue its own gain, as our politicians, bankers, and realtors do, would be cancerous. That is where the media have let democracy down. They should have built a gene pool conscience of the race. Observe this microphage white blood cell pouring itself out after bacteria. That is the immune response. You see no policeman but the cell itself, no central authority, nor with this hoplite, wrapping invaders in arrowed pseudopods. He is on his own. But the whole action is moral, and for the whole. It is only by plan that we can salvage the earth, but not a plan of the dumb and tyrannical. We have to constitute a feedback community of observing and governing intelligence, some many-minded Odyssean navigator. This program smacks of a new religion, a love and worship of the mothering earth floating at ease in the cosmos. But we cannot simply trust to Tellus Gaia. If that orb is alive, it is vulnerable, like every living being, to sickness and death, our death. We must intensify science to keep it green, but a new science of the mysterious whole, redeemed from short-sighted bondage to logic, profit, and war. So we scheme, while revolutions of 2 centuries have heightened at once intemperate hope and violence. After the French reign of terror and Napoleon came the inconsequential Paris uprising of 1830, which would only change one Bourbon for another. Yet to what crux of reckless zeal Delacroix has lashed it in his Liberty Leading the People. Next, the workers' insurrection and brief commune of 1848, just when Marx and Engels had released their manifesto, would prompt Daumier's partisan response, as in this Les Miserables group on the barricades. In a calmer century, Rousseau had doubted the emergence of good laws from civil strife and hatred. Many governments have been established in war, famine, or sedition, but they are the very governments that destroy the state. The choice of the time for instituting any law is one of the surest criteria, whether it be the work of a legislator or tyrant. Prophetic condemnation of militant prophets, whether of left, right, or middle. So the manifesto. The communist's ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communist revolution. Of which it could be asked, what's all that hate doing in there? Though the curse of hate would fall on all parties, the child, father to the man. This between wars trio of Mussolini, Wilson, Lenin, all fatefully snared. The tide has swept us forward. However, 1905-6 is the date of the first Russian Revolution. Such a frenzy of defiant hope, joined with Nietzschean scorn, we have to be destroyers, as in this poster, Chains Broken, heightens the petition and massacre of the same year, while in music, Scriabin's 1907 poem of ecstasy cradles its Orphic egg of explosive yearnings, a complicity of yea shouts and poignant cries. So Kustodiev's absolute peasant worker giant, trampling and shattering the established city, stirs the privileged to alarm and hate, a wizard of terror that blasts the great rebel to a skeleton, trailing blood and fire. As it counterblasts those of station to the beast and enemy, this gold-greedy hog of capital. What can it mean that Shostakovich, in the climactic forte of his withdrawn Fourth Symphony, 2.5 minutes of inwrought percussive dissonance, cleaves the stark violence of 2 great wars and of revolution from its former ecstasy, crusting the volcanic brew of Eisenstein's 10 Days That Shook the World? Drums, cannon, Krupp and Allied, shell both fronts. West and east, the carnage of trench warfare. Spent Russia still lashed to the field, this poster for 5.5% war bonds. From April 1917 on, Lenin was there. With Trotsky below, the end justifies all means. Trotsky to workers on strike and petitioning revolutionary sailors, I'll shoot you like pheasants. In that kindled pyre of burning, looting, purging, starving, the population of Petrograd fell from 2.5 million to 500,000. All parties, white, red, socialist, espoused terrorism. Production failed. Money more or less disappeared. By 1921, when Trotsky had broken the Civil War, famine and disease were rife. Even cannibalism surfaced. These butchers of the human dead. Lenin, we are beggars, hungry, ruined beggars. Yet hate laid the blame. Why not? on the swollen capitalist powers, France, the USA, England. What ecstasy could remain once the plotting exterminator of the old Soviet vanguard, Stalin, had tightened his rule? Meanwhile, the war of left and right spread over the world. Spain, refugees by a gutted farm, turned to France. Ironic chance that the only appearance in these shows of the Great Chinese War is for the 1937 movement of troops in the Sino-Japanese War, from which the most appalling pictures show the bombing of Chongqing, with the air raid slaughter of women and children. Then it was the Nazi build-up for the assault on Europe, London, Moscow. I will repay, saith the Lord. Wesel on the Rhine, north of the Ruhr. Could the climax be other than the atomic cloud of which Oppenheimer averred, I am Shiva, destroyer of worlds? Here, Shostakovich clang of ordnance gives way to a muffled span of brooding, dark as the trial of the Jews, or Russia's Gulag archipelago, or the no-win aftermaths of Cold War, Korea, 1950, Vietnam, 1966, phosphorus bombs on a jungle village. These brasses smoldering like Soviet misrule in East Europe, down to the fired palace of Romanian Ceausescu. What is the prophecy? What most of all when Shostakovich, after such intensities of attack and repression, distills for the symphony's close a space of mysterious intimation, sprinkled with rising arpeggios of the heavenly celeste. Who can hear it as the pealing bells of an orthodox past? Or attach it to the frail posters of Soviet hope, the exploded delight of this 1917 May Day? Exiled Kandinsky's spiritual abstractions, this 1926 rapture of several circles, seem nearer. If such was the art affinity, no wonder Shostakovich withdrew the fourth. But if prophecy, why not of the coming wave of liberation? This joyful breaching of the Berlin Wall, Christmas 1989. Or is that promise as vain as the other claims? Some open throttle drive to supermarket expansion, consumer goods, and energy. Could even Havel's victory sign, made over the streets of Prague, erase the unsolved troubles of the West, which had brought in rigors of right and left? Or can today's spendthrift opulence obscure our own crisis of inequality and foreclosure, racial slums, violence, the speculative wars Marx deceived himself to avoid? But our fate is intensified by what Marx was blind to. Everywhere the power of an earth rape, defiant of plan, whelming nature in wastes of productivity and poisons of science. Through such build-up in the mechanized ravage of war, the ecological havoc of peace, the globe with all its creatures, chiefly man, is snared like this dolphin, whose dying eye looks through nylon strands of a 35-mile ocean-exhausting drift net. So a centennial question mounts like an ancient prayer, whether the reconstructive earth, here suggested as through past wars by the guardian angel over Chartres, can so far assert itself as to avoid impending catastrophe. That question is being tested moment by moment. It has even of late almost been answered in the negative. Appalling, the intensity of faith and will it took to produce civilization, to rear Egypt and Mesopotamia from the bogs of pre-agricultural man, both peoples Semitic, of kindred yet warring tribes. Here from Egypt, Saqqara, third dynasty of the Step Pyramid, about 2660 B.C., King Zoser's mutilated statue, its jewel eyes gouged out by later Vandals. And from 2700 B.C. Sumeria, a gypsum orant, now in the Baghdad Museum, menaced perhaps by bombs. As if the daimonic force it took to found higher culture must become, in the reactive chemistry of place and race, the bane of its continuance. Let two relics bridge the millennia since those origins, 9th century B.C. and after, reliefs of hunting and war, to be transported wholesale from palace ruins of Assyrian conquerors to the British Museum. And, shrine of the conquered, this rock of Masada, where the Jews, most God-inspired, maligned and persecuted of those people, chose in 70 A.D. mass suicide, men, women, and children, rather than submit to Rome, a two-edged precedent. It is in these faith cradles of civilization that the question of its future looms. Now, when the will and drive of the whole United Nations, free enterprise, communist, third world, should be creatively focused on a rethinking and reordering of everything: population, diversity, production, distribution, resources, energy, where every leader needs to plan and implement vision. This imbroglio of desert and crescent shows leadership impotent, but for bungling to the chaos of war. To have fostered and armed a gambler like Saddam Hussein, as reckless as unprincipled, for manifest aggression, until, tempted by our own devil, we espouse the mischief, down to our saturation plane and missile bombing, his oil sabotage of the Persian Gulf. In a world so dangerously poised, so bereft of formative control, so driven to catabolic stampede, the balance Zeus and Jove hung in the sky must read global catastrophe, advancing at its own chain-reactive rate. That fact seems less in question than whether the calamity will be total or corrective. Here, the Janus counsel of wisdom should be to work for corrective containment, although aware that the cosmos we praise may, among countless worlds, already have seeded, by our connivance, the miscarriage of earth. And yet those heavenly scales span a contradiction. Do they herald a fate, or from the name Libra, a libration? In Daniel 5:27, God, under that image, warns Belshazzar, "Thou art weighed in the balance and found wanting." Milton follows in Paradise Lost. The fiend looked up and knew his mounted scale aloft. So in this Memlik judgment, the good soul to the angel's right settles like gold, the sinner rises like dross. Contrast the Iliad. The father balanced his golden scales. The Achaeans' death day was heaviest. Here, down is bad, as with Van der Weyden's sinking sinner on the angel's left. But the paradox is not the ambiguity of up and down. It is of gravity and spirit, that the weighing of souls, swayed in this autant carving by angel and devil, must share with life some more than quantum uncertainty. So too with the fate of the world. It is not determined but probable. Man's conscious feedbacks may cross the threshold of surprise, almost of miracle. We have again to assess the odds more searchingly, beginning with the wheel and arrow projections of history, while the organizing power and fate of all our shows draws to this here and now, as in the plants of Goethe's Metamorphosis. When the plant vegetates, flowers, fructifies, it is still the same organs which under protean shape expand as leaves, contract to the calyx, expand again in a petalled crown, contract to the organs of reproduction, then expand for the last time as fruit. What is new in Vico's Science of Cycles of 1725 and 44? That his nations are less political states than cultures, that their causality shifts from what is outward as war to what is inward as religion and poetry, anticipating our great pulses of consciousness or soul. Such a mutation as from this archaic Greek peplos chore, 6th century B.C., to a face from the Areopagus under the doubts of Augustan Rome. Yet Vico's pattern for this is a wheel of recurrent ages, of gods, of heroes, of men. In Egypt, from the pyramid-building Old Kingdom, through a Middle Kingdom of weighty control, to the human quest and yearning of the new. Or we might extend Vico to our own time, charting the Christian West, from the god-force of Chartres, 1210, through Bernini's embattled Monsignor Santoni, 1615, to a Picasso self of 1907, between the human and a Kafka mask. In the cycle show, the Greek show, and even in the personal review of Now Alpha, we have dramatized the confrontation at each turning of this wheel, where late cycle luxury is ravished by barbarian renewal. This Theron lady, about 1500 B.C., with an Iron Age warrior of the sequent time of troubles. Yet there is something rather static about the imaged repetitions. Thus, after 2 millennia, say 400 A.D., in the twilight of pagan Rome, this ivory, high-born priestess at the altar of Jove confronts a gold statuette of some tunicate chieftain of Gaul. Too static, when moderns make Vico predictive, as Spengler, Toynbee, on the slopes of Western decadence, conjure force from nostalgias. What hierophant, in the circle of Yeats, Pound, H.D., will this priestess evoke? Or where, in her ambience, will Nietzsche's barbarians of the 20th century appear? Ominous, when the post-romantic brooding and pseudo-mysticism of Berkeley's powerfully painted Isle of the Dead, the sheeted soul rode to the hollow of grave and birth, between rock flanks, under shade of cypress, when that yearning spawns the hysteria of Dali's 1935 Palladio's Corridor of dramatic surprise. Palladio, Renaissance founder of our trusted Jeffersonian orders, his barrel vault collapsing among surreal vulgarities, surely a static determinism of history. Against that classical wheel of time, the Hebrew arrow had been launched, as from Isaiah, this Dead Sea Scroll. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, Emmanuel, the Prince of Peace. Through John the Baptist, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. To John the Divine, Christ hath made us kings and priests unto God and his Father. But that city of God was more within than without, of eternity more than of time. Church and state had not withered away. By the 12th century, Joachim de Flores, extending biblical history to present and future, foresaw an actual coming in time of the Holy Ghost, such freedom as Virgil assures Dante at the top of Purgatory. I crown and mitre you over yourself. If Nicholas of Verdun's correspondences, as left from Moses receiving God's law to the disciples receiving his Spirit, were pushed to a mystic now, what would it be but Joachim's third kingdom of grace abounding? Joachim, the first age of the Old Testament should be assigned to the Father, the second of the New to the Son, and the third to the Holy Spirit. When that promise begun in a few will be consummated in many, Joel, I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy. Similarly, in the new light of Gothic, rose windows spread radiance from God the Father or from the mother and child, out through patriarchs and saints to the life and occupations of the world. So Reims and Paris, then the flower-wreathed heart of York. In the sun sphere of Dante's Paradise, it is Franciscan Bonaventura, opponent with Dominican St. Thomas of Joachim's promise, who is made to introduce and praise him. Here Dante, uplifted by the paired circling dance of such ordained lights of intellect and love, is suddenly dazzled by a far brighter horizon of soul sparks, new spirits making a ring beyond the other circles. So these music-making elders of the Sainte-Chapelle, O vero sfavillar del Santo Spiro, O very sparkling of the Holy Ghost, at which Beatrice smiles, so Dante hails the spiritual seeding of earth. Had not the windows of 3 centuries told as much, or in painting Giotto's radiant humanizing of the birth of God? How successive waves of Reformation take up the earthly kingdom of Joachim's Franciscan followers. Luther, before the violence his preaching loosed, threw him into fear and trembling, writing in confident joy of the inestimable power and liberty of Christians. Josquin's climactic masses. The Pange Lingua Agnus, and Incarnation Summit in all art, Grunewald's spill of light and angels from the Father in glory into a mountain landscape where the child is dandled by Mary beside a rose without thorns. By the time of Milton, Rembrandt, and Schütz, the same God-trust rests always more on the weight and solemnity of the human drama. In the radiant landscape, it is the sun, down clouds, which sanctifies the spatial recess. In Cromwell's England, the fifth monarchy men expect the coming and present kingship of Christ. The stakes are always higher, the faith wars more charged with material detonation. The next revolutionary move brings us back to France. 1793, Marat's assassination under the cleaving shears of fact and dream. For Condorcet's history, the blade of hope, non-Christian, was for a 10th epoch perfection and fulfillment of man. The blade of fact was the mounting reign of terror, which pursued him to a prison death. In thought, it was Germany which brought to fruition in 3 astonishing schoolmates, Hegel, Hölderlin, and Schelling, radical transformations of Joachim's temporal coming, blended sometimes with Vico's cycles. All at that turn to the 1800s, as if launched on Beethoven's early symphonies toward Promethean daring. Schelling, youngest of the 3, by 1809 had completed Of Human Freedom, tracing from the primal dark ground of nature and self-willed battle of history God's physical emergence as light, his moral emergence as spirit. At the same time, Runge was composing versions, small and large, of his transcendental morning, to image the life forces of earth, as in Burma's sacred element. No one has formulated the death drive of history more powerfully than Hegel, where a God at war with himself is only to be actualized through successive alienations, so the fruit that every culture ripens and hungers for becomes a poison draught to it, and yet at the same time the rise of a higher principle. By this cunning of reason, every decay and fall from China to the West advances the self-realization of spirit, as with Schelling actually and concretely in the world. In such a theodicy, John Martin, Victorian fantast, leads from his great day of God's wrath to these earthly plains of heaven, white with souls. The third schoolmate and transformer of history was Hölderlin, most enrapt elegiac poet of the West, undervalued through life and mad for almost 40 years, for whom, as Nietzsche would elaborate, the expected German coming would not be Christian but Greek. After the long night of Olympian withdrawal, for which Christ, second Dionysus, gave ritual comforts, Hölderlin foreknows the dawn ecstasy and mythic return of the keen deities of earth and sky. So the gods of heaven come in, with such deep trembling down through the shadows, their day spring breaks among men. Beethoven's third, evincing most how the Zeus eagle from Indus and Parnassus and the votive hills of Italy, exultant over the Alps, wings on at last, and sees widespread the many-patterned lands. To wake that Germany, Hölderlin, in bread and wine, his greatest poem, invokes the Hellas he would never see. By day and by night, godlike fire drives us on. Wherefore to the isthmus come, there where the open sea roars under Parnassus, and snow gleams on the rock heights above Delphi, there to Olympian lands and Bacchic heights of Kithaeron. Among pines and firs, over slopes mantled with grapes, where Thebe below and Ismenus sound in the land of Cadmos, thence comes and points us thither the past and coming God. Yet every invocation of that lost and expected glory, Greece, feast hall floored with ocean, tables, mountain peaks, lifted time out of mind for a destined coming. Recalls the desolation. Where are the groves and temples? Delphi slumbers, and where now does the great fate sound? No more in Greece, nor yet in Germany. We come too late, or too soon. So the will to anticipate that coming, look, we are it ourselves, we, fruit of Hesperia, darkens the lonely task of unshared prophecy. And wherefore poets in a time of dearth, und wozu Dichter in dürftiger Zeit, until in the blind singer, stretched to madness, he prays release. Take from my heart, that I may bear it, life, the godlike, take from me. Yet in what dusk love paean he hymns that night itself, of which he would foresee the dawn. the opening of bread and wine, brims the conscious space of the distiche with the soul inebriated gloaming of that solitude, a mood suffusion not even Beethoven's funeral march approximates. Only Schubert's gravewood yearning in the winter journey with the soul search of Friedrich and Karus.
Was vermeid ich denn die Wege, wo die andern Wanderer gehen?
Ringsum ruhet die Stadt, still wird die erleuchtete Gasse, und mit Fackeln geschmückt rauschen die Wagen hinweg. Quiet spreads over the town. Hushed now are the glimmering byways, and with torches agleam, rustling the wagons depart. Ah, but the sweep of strings sounds far from gardens. Fountains ever bubbling and fresh whisper on vaporous beds. Still in dusk-laden air roll the echoing bells of evening. Fruitless to transcribe mere objects which that German floats in a liquid of mood sounds, still in dämmriger Luft ertönen geläutete Glocken. Only music pours back those volatile pools, or art in its way, Karus wanderer at the city gate, with the love-death pilgrim of Schubert's Winterreise. Momently wakens a wind and stars in the peaks of the forest. Sea and the shadow image of earth, the moon, secretly comes also, and night swirled in stars, and little concerned with us, spectrally hovering there, a stranger to what is mortal, far over rock heights hung, glances supernal and sad, glänzt die Erstaunende dort, die Fremdlingen unter den Menschen, über Gebirgeshöhen, traurig und prächtig herauf. In that prophetic night, in the death joy of the gods' betrayal, today's tragic earth triumph finds its utterance. Whereas any Vico to Toynbee cycle would have led the ripe nostalgias of Rome or the West, Arnold's strange disease of modern life and take-me cowled forms, as Eliot would lead his lost generations of Prufrock, Gerontian hollow men beyond the orbit of the shuddering bear. And with the luck of the poor in spirit, through alienation and skeptic denial, to await in the desert the plain-song descent of an Ash Wednesday priest, surely not Christ, while Eliot's "Bless me, Father, though I do not wish to wish these things" would lure his convert quartets into a rose garden moment of late-cycle nostalgia. Humankind cannot bear very much reality. When I began this study during the Nazi overthrow of Eliot's Between Wars, it seemed the sculptor Epstein, from the romantic realism of his portraits, through the hardening abstraction of Cubism, to the world plight of his 1939 Adam, had pursued some such cyclical course as Eliot's, though with more fierceness and humanity, nor could I avoid comparison with Stravinsky's 1930 Symphony of Psalms. Yet, as I review the sequence now, 50 years afterwards, Epstein's Adam puts the Aquarian question. Was this the stylized objectification of man's post-romantic agony, or did it purpose, as symbolic history must, to rear a tragic containment for the crisis of Earth itself? Meanwhile, our greatest poet Yeats, in his early dreams of an Irish golden dawn, had hailed Joachim's Holy Spirit as a multitudinous influx to bring back Celtic myth and the gods of Erie. That wind of change was tied, as Nietzsche's had been, to the spiritual winnowing of an impending European war. But after 20 years and the actuality of World War I, we are but weasels fighting in a hole. Even Yeats toyed with the cycle of Christ's return, as Eliot was doing. Thus the imagined sailing from sensuous Ireland to the holy city of Byzantium, consume my heart away, sick with desire, and gather me into the artifice of eternity. So in demon and beast we hear, oh, what a sweetness strayed through barren Tebade, when St. Anthony and his monks starved upon the shore and withered to a bag of bones. But Yeats perceived that the Christ program would take him through Plato and Plotinus to the deserts of theology, while in fact he was an Irish poet, and what theme had Homer but original sin? Here, from their County Sligo youth, Constance Gore Booth, the beauty of her countryside, later a political prisoner. So between Yeats' own search and his wife's spiritual dictations, he brooding like Rembrandt's philosopher under a spiral stare, they hit on a two-lobed cycle of intersecting cones, alternating in time, somehow combining Vico with Hölderlin, whom Yeats could hardly have read, though he had browsed upon Nietzsche. The stair was in his restored medieval tower near Gort, the tower most relevant to the early violent phase of Western culture, or to the renewed violence of that time of civil war, could also contain the great gyres of history. Briefly, from a vertex above, that Zeus-kindling of Homeric Greece, here sampled in a funerary urn, Yeats, I imagined the Annunciation that founded Greece as made to Leda, and that from one of her eggs came love, and from the other war. A 12-phased lunar Gaia of myth and sensuous gods descends, widening toward its late classical variety, instanced by a drunk Hercules. Yeats, in pity for man's darkening thought, he walked that room, and issued thence in Galilean turbulence. Here the absolute incursion of Christ born and crucified summons below to the vertex of a solar cone, a culture of one God, theology, rational science. So that spiral mounts to our age of turning and turning in the widening Gaia, where to a Penelope Jenks terracotta called Valerie, the beast to be born should recur in Dionysiac rape. Thus, in Yeats' News for the Delphic Oracle, nymphs and satyrs copulate in the foam, a changing of the tinctures for which the poet at 68 would undergo Steinach rejuvenation to become the incarnate voice of that passion. As an intimate has told of his last euphoria, he spoke of nothing but sex, mysticism, and history, all one in his mind. The central room of the tower was Yeats' place of night study, as he enacted Il Penseroso's Platonist with Palma's engraving, or let my lamp at midnight hour be seen in some high lonely tower. So Milton and Yeats, with Rembrandt's Rest on the Flight in the Dublin National Gallery, benighted travellers from markets and from fairs have seen his midnight candle glimmering. On the study table lay Sato's sword, curved and stainless as a new moon, gift of a Japanese admirer, sign of the rending and creating absolute at the vertex of every historical cone, that past and coming violence Yeats had to fear and affirm. All changed, changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. A few miles west, Lady Gregory's house, and especially her garden with its bust of Virgil's patron Maecenas, upheld the western plateau of aristocratic life and art. So in Yeats' A Prayer for My Daughter, he, Hierophant of the Second Coming, the ceremony of innocence is drowned, soon to turn his pen to Crazy Jane, prays that his daughter may come into a house of custom and ceremony, innocence and beauty. Though he has been on the wind-lashed battlements of the tower, imagining in excited reverie that the future years had come dancing to a frenzied drum out of the murderous innocence of the sea. For Lady Gregory's innocence of custom, this Gita innocence of Sato's sword. No doubt, when Vico's mill wheel of return, Joachim's fire, arrow, and assault of spirit had become for Yeats a paradox road of poetry to affirm both. That oscillating whirl between dire antinomies required some resolving, timeless embrace. In Yeats' early worship of Maud Gonne, such need had found a platonic voice. Lives on this lonely face, and who dreamed that beauty passes like a dream? In the 1928 volume, named The Tower, beside poems of polarity, guiles, and cycles, one of the greatest among schoolchildren sets a memory of Maud's youth against her present state. Surely the reference is to Donatello's penitent old Magdalene of the 1400s, then in the Florentine baptistery. Did Quattrocento fingers fashion it, hollow of cheek as if it drank the wind, and took a mess of shadows for its meat? How startlingly the heartbreak of our condition, stretched between flesh and eternal presences, those self-born mockers of man's enterprise, is consumed in a vitally altered Platonism, where the imaged wholeness of a chestnut tree fuses into love, music, and dance, the old antinomies of beauty and wisdom, body and soul. O chestnut tree, great-rooted blossomer, are you the leaf, the blossom, or the bowl? O body swayed to music, O brightening glance, how can we know the dancer from the dance? Think now, in the ad-libbed visuals of this homing sequence, as in all symbolized philosophy, we must mind at once arrow and wheel, the flowing stream and its expansion or convergence into round, for which I interpolate a poetic discourse from my five-chambered heart, pool of Tao. I waited the fullness of time. As sunset deepened, the wind died. In the hush, the pool was an iris of trees fringing a sky, motionless, until a flight of geese passed over. Then I heard the sound of water. A stream that falls to the pool lingers and falls away. When the geese were gone, the sky gave over, the motion received, but mine was full, holding flight and water, the arrow and the wheel. So, in the final form of a vision, Yeats conceives a 13th cycle, cone, or sphere, like Blake's convergent point of Jacob's stair, mysteriously surrounding the historical pulses, altering their determinism and bringing will, human and divine, into the temporal and material. Did not Epicurus make his atoms swerve to spring the determinism of Democritus, as quantum uncertainty has opened up our physics? Yeats. The 13th cycle or cone may deliver us from the 12 cycles of time and space. It is the phaseless sphere within which live all souls that have been set free, and every daimon and ghostly self, these Chinese immortals in a Japanese screen. What that sphere intends, we cannot precisely say, for there the unique intervenes both in us and beyond. The particulars are the work of the 13th cycle, which is in every man and called by every man his freedom. It is the uncontrollable mystery on the bestial floor. Crazy Jane's dark Christian word, for nothing can be soul or whole that has not been rent. Climaxes in the circus animal's desertion last poems, Yeats knows that when his high visions have failed, I must lie down where all the ladders start, in the foul rag and bone shop of the heart. Yet the poet who accepts that resides in the oneness of the 13th sphere, simultaneous repository of all that has been or is to be. Cast a cold eye on life, on death, horsemen pass by. His is the other knowledge of the curse of Cromwell, that the swordsmen and the ladies can still keep company, that I am still their servant, though all are underground. The problem goes to the very core of thought, the complementarity of knowledge. Neither mind nor soul can embrace a fabric which does not unite the trial and search of becoming with the source of all Greek wonder, being. Here, to the Zen flute, a supreme picture by Chinese Yen Hui, late 13th century, this silk painting of a Taoist immortal who, in his crippled beggar's body, sees himself on a cloud track above, taking the sky road. Even in the proud embodiments of the West, all souls of depth so thread the one and many, weaving the actual and visionary to a robe as seamless as the polyphony of Purcell's In Nomine for 7 vials. So from Rembrandt's last decade, we draw a complementary pair, immortal and mortal, the triumphant Pallas Athena, the whimsical, sad lady with a pink, musing on our happiness that passeth soon as flowers fair. In Dante's Empyrean, God's Spirit first appears flowing out through time and space, as in Botticelli's drawing, a stream of sparks between flowered shores. But when the poet has dipped his eyes, those shadowy presages gather to the eternal round of the rose of paradise, here by Doré, while the inferno, purgatory, paradise, all end with the word stelle, stars. E quindi uscimmo a riveder le stelle, and we came thence to see again the stars, puro e disposto a salire alle stelle, pure and disposed to ascend to the stars, l'amor che muove il sol e l'altre stelle, the love that moves the sun and other stars. Surely it is in this cosmos that the Omega Earth began, has evolved, and ultimately will end. While Marx, despising mystics and romantics, trusted a partisan upheaval to institute a classless brotherhood, where, as the Yorkites had phrased it, church and state would wither away. How much glory and agony these never-withering states have extracted from that promise, which brings us back to where Shostakovich left us, at the end of a century of global wars and revolutions. History Seen as from the outside is a configuration in time and space, like Christo's great sausage blown up over the park and city of Kassel. But from within, and in its own right, as we who inhabit its curvatures experience it, world history is the shape of space-time itself. No doubt Christo's phallus is a comic array, whereas that history, everywhere webbed with waves and fields of electromagnetic messengers, relativistically eternal, since at the speed of light time ceases and all causalities act in mythic simultaneity, rather suggests the 1937 flame cascade of the Zeppelin von Hindenburg, such a chain reactive now as we must steel ourselves to convey, whether of achievement or catastrophe. There is no division between that now and what has been ripening since the fall of Lucifer, this earth harvest, of which we have to inquire what appears on the plus side, what hopes of a life road. But here those instructors Yeats claimed in a vision tell me to break off, since that must be the closing thrust of the triune now, symbolic history's last and 40th show, entitled The Rooted Future.